Testing. 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 Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we did the first review exercises, let's see, in the last stream. So we're going to do the other ones today, and I'm going to push back the due date here since it's got parts from 1 and 2. So let's go with, where's the due date? Here it is. We'll go another week on that. So you can look at this and work on the exercise. Okay. Did I do these already? Sorry if I sound funny. I had to get a crown, so they had to numb my face.
So I concatenate it. So here we're going to edit the value. Maybe.
We did do the dictionary.
Okay.
Oh, so maybe I did go through these. Well, only 2 people have them turned in, so.
So I'm not sure
I'll still
if Angie went over this or if you guys have seen this, but
wow, I've done
actually comparing
so many programs since we did this last week that I barely remember what we did. Okay. Yeah, we didn't do the string builder, but I don't think we'll need to use that for this stuff. So I guess what we're going to do is start looking at what exactly we need to know for Chapter 9. because I moved the assignment for that back until October 15th. Okay. All right. So it looks like up until this class, you actually haven't used object-oriented programming, which is a shame because I had made that assumption when I started this class, but it looks like Chapter 9 is the actual first chapter where they talk about object-oriented programming. So we can start there. Okay. Let's not read the book word for word. But let's use the Chapter 9 slides to help guide me through the material so I don't miss anything. And if anyone's there in the chat and you can hear me fine and there's no issues, if you would just say hi, that would help me out. All right, so if you haven't worked with classes and objects before in a programming language, it's almost like starting over in programming. All right, so really everything you've learned up to this point, you could basically consider scripting, and it's good for small things, but it doesn't scale into a large project, and it has issues with being modular, so you can't reuse the code very easily, and you cannot expand on it very easily. So with object-oriented programming, we kind of create a structure, or it uses a paradigm that solves those issues. All right. So we are going to look at all the parts of C# regarding creating our own new classes, instantiating objects from those classes, and doing all kinds of things like giving the classes properties and methods. It's like where to start here. Okay. So the first thing is describe class concepts. So I can demonstrate that as we go. And please do ask questions if you have a question on something that I'm doing, or if you're working on maybe one of the assignments and you're stuck, we can take a look at that too. All right, so at the beginning of the class, I threw you in the deep end without realizing you had never seen water before. And so hopefully I've been able to reel you back in with those review exercises, and we can start actually learning object-oriented programming. So I'm assuming you guys have been seeing since the last class where you were looking at C#, you know, you've been looking at this main class with the main method as a starting point quite a bit. All right, so you already know this is the method that's going to run when you compile and run the program. All right, so if we want any code to run, we just stick it in this method. All right. If we want to create a new class, generally you add it in a new file, and you name the file the name of the class. So let's do a node class. All right. And we can just grab this as a starting point. And to be able to use this file, we need to make sure that the other file can see it. If you guys are having any problem reading what I'm showing on the screen, I can zoom in if that helps. Let's see. Just gotta find the zoom button. Maybe there isn't one. Oh well. This you should probably be able to see. I am gonna zoom in on the replit here. There. I think you can see that. You can see that. And we'll fix the PowerPoint here. There we go. Getting everything set up so I can explain this topic. All right. Okay. Hey Scott, when you create a C# class in a separate file, do you have to use a namespace to tie those together? Or how do you access that class from the main file? Is it you have to put using the name of the class? Yeah, okay. We'll just Google it. Let's see. This is one of those things you do at the beginning without, thinking about it. It's just a setup step, so it's one of those things it's hard to remember the syntax. So creating a C# class in a separate file. Okay. Well, they're going to talk about it, but they're not going to show any example. There we go. So we have to give the file a namespace. Which, if you've taken the Python class, I'm assuming you would have done it in Java. Trying to think if there were... Anyway, this is almost like importing a file, but you just kind of tie files together in your project using a namespace. And I believe that should fix it. Okay. And I know you guys like adding extra curly braces everywhere. We'll move that in. We'll move this over. Got to make some space. All right. The lines get long in C#. Oops. I want to make sure everything's aligned so that way you guys should be getting in the habit of doing this too. It makes it a lot easier to read. So we are in the node.cs file that we created. All right, we're going to give it the ability to use the system namespace so we can access things like the console and whatnot. I'm not sure if we'll actually use that or not, but it's just it's just a safe bet to throw at least using system in there. All right, so we got to rename things. So since we named the file node, that's we're going to name, that's what we were going to name the class. All right, so you declare that, and we don't need this anymore. All right, so the first thing that you need to create method-wise is a constructor that has the same name as the method. All right. And so this would be a method signature, line 6 here. This is called a method signature and this one is for a constructor method, which allows us to create instances of this class, which are called objects. Okay, I'm going to try to repeat those terms and use them in sentences as much as I can, because that's something you should be able to talk about if you're thinking of going into programming and software development. Okay, and then inside of here you would set up the rules for creating this object, like setting its properties and different things like that. So when you're designing a class, the reason you would create a class is you have a problem you need to solve, and you can't do it with, the basic functionality. Plus, this is something you may want to reuse later. All right. Sorry, I keep looking over here just to check the chat as we go. Okay, so adding some properties. There are properties and then there are fields that you can assign to a class. And so we're going to look at, most often you're going to use properties, and properties start with a capital letter. So what can a node have? Let's give a node bandwidth. All right. And then you can create some simple get and set methods by doing this, I believe. That. Let's start with that, and then inside of the public node we should be able to So this is the, here, let me put some notes in here, because you got to learn this terminology. This is a constructor. This is a, well, let's put it over here. This is a property. That way if I move it, I don't forget to move the note. All right. All right, so comments are useful for other programmers to know what you're doing, to block out code for debugging, and even for you to keep track of what you're doing. So you might put something like this at the beginning of your file. This is a block comment in C#, and so you might put your name, and you can put various other things that you need in there. But I like to put, or anyway, when I was taught programming, it was common to try to explain each part that you're adding. So the purpose of this node is something that I'm going to think of later. So I've done some research lately on 5G networks, and one of the things that is going to be part of it is a piece of hardware which is referred to as a node, and it will be something called a cognitive radio. So it'll have machine learning, and it uses higher frequencies. And so here, let's create this class. Class is for creating node objects, and we'll go from there depending on what methods we want to use. Okay, so here we're saying this node class is going to have a make sure I got these right. What line? 22. Oh, it's looking in main. Okay. Whoops. If you see this main.exe here, what has happened is when you hit run, or if you're in Visual Studio and you hit compile, the compiler reads this code and converts it into compiled code, all right? And that is not readable by this text editor anyway, and it's kind of, you're not supposed to be able to read it. But there, I was at a conference last summer, yeah, and the class that I took, the guy is a white hat hacker out of Boston. He teaches at a community college out east, and he showed me this NSA tool that was someone leaked. It's been a long time ago, but it actually uses a technique to reverse engineer compiled code, which, you know, is insane. But you have to be really smart to use it, and so he gave us an example, and a really simple example, and it was still complicated, but he talked about how he had used it to reverse engineer code to identify vulnerabilities. Then he contacts the company and says, you know, I'm able to withdraw money from other people's accounts at your bank. I can come in and talk to you about security, and, you know, he does consulting. And then so half the time they try to sue him, the other half of the time they just ignore him, he says. So I should post his website, because he keeps track of every company that he's contacted and what progress it is. I know his name is Sam. Sam, Boston. Anyway, I'll have to find that later. And the reason I'm bringing this up is every one of the websites that he lists, he also talks about the vulnerability and why he thinks they're not fixing it. But he also wants people to be aware of what kind of vulnerabilities you can include in your code, your code and your programs and your servers that are easily broken into, and so that way you don't use those. So hackers are extremely useful when they aren't stealing information, but they just like the challenge of hacking, basically, or stealing information, proving they can steal the information, and then selling ways to fix it to companies, which I think is pretty awesome. All right, back to the actual material. So that's why, I want you to know what this is, the main.exe. So every time I compile this, it'll update that. So honestly, in Replit, we don't even need this. So it's going to create it every time. So, I mean, I guess just ignore it. Well, it's only going to create it if there are no syntax errors. Okay. So did I put something somewhere I wasn't supposed to? I should just look up the syntax here. Okay. Alright, so we want to look at, well, it's probably in here, honestly. Okay, property. It says it's a member of a class. Members include properties, methods, basically everything on the highest level under the class is a member. All right. And the reason we use properties is if you have created, well, you probably haven't created classes in other languages. You can do it in JavaScript and you can do it in Python, but they weren't really created with object-oriented programming in mind, so it's weird using that. But anyway, when you create a property, you want to give access. If you want to give access to that property, you would create a get and set method. A get method, it allows other classes to access and see the value in the property, and a set method allows you to change the property. Okay, and they're almost always going to just involve the exact same code, almost always. And so we have a shorthand for this. So here's what it looks like longhand. I don't know if that's a word or not, but so here they are creating a property, and they're adding the get method and the set method. So if you do employee dot get ID number, it should return the value stored in the field of that property. Okay. And here, if we want to change the value of ID number, see, we've declared, in this example, they've declared, this is a good example because it shows you what's happening in the background before you look at the shorthand, which I think is important. So let's go ahead and just use that for now, and then we'll come back and look at the shorthand. Okay, so we want to include this in here. All right. Thank you for saying hi, Caleb, by the way. Okay, so we want to do, we're going to manually create the field, and it's called a backing field. And we need to give it a type. I forgot to do that. We need to give it get that will return the backing field. So if you pay attention to the names here, the field is you can think of it as a local variable to the object that you create with this class, and so you don't want anything outside of this class to see this. All right, now I just realized you probably can't see the PowerPoint here, so inside of the get method we need to return the value in ID number. So what does that look like? Well, since an outside class cannot access the value stored in here, we've given it a property and a method to get that value. So since these since this property and this backing field are in the same level here, this get method does have access to the value in here. So if I do capital ID number, I'm talking about the property, and inside of that we have the backing field, and that is a lowercase first letter, then caps for each word after that. Okay. So get needs to return the value, set needs to set the value, so we can add those in. And let's make sure we get the syntax right here. Okay, don't need this. So depending on whether you like to have your curly braces hang or if you prefer them to drop, that's up to you. I'm a hanger, some people are droppers. If you work for a company, they'll tell you what you are. And so you might be saying, this sure is a lot of overhead. I could just do all of this in main. Well, you could. But then you wouldn't learn object-oriented programming. And it's going to be really hard to see the benefits of object-oriented programming in this class because it's going to be impossible to create and do a project that fully utilizes object-oriented programming. All the projects in this class are much too small that it's always going to feel like doing this is a waste of time, unfortunately. But remember, you're just doing this to learn object-oriented programming, so that way you're not going to encounter, if you want to get a job, you're most likely going to work with object-oriented programming. So you can't, what I'm trying to say is you can't get away with avoiding it. I mean, it's the name of the class. Even though, for some reason, the first object-oriented programming class does not talk about classes and objects as far as I'm aware, which explains why everyone was panicking when I just jumped into it. I'll have to fix that in the future semesters. Probably rush to chapter 9, honestly. Then we can then we can probably do a project of a large enough scope for object-oriented programming too. And I realize now I'm using the wrong name for the property, so this node now has a ID number, which is actually a really good property for this, because when 5G is fully implemented, we'll actually have a network of nodes. They won't have very good range, which means there's going to have to be a lot of them everywhere. So we need a way to keep track of them. How about ID number, right? Okay. So they use this value word here. And that should work, but we'll figure it out. All right, and then to be able to test it, we need to in the constructor, we'll just set a default ID number of 0. And then let's fix all of my syntax errors I made because I changed a bunch of stuff around. Unexpected symbol public. That's because we didn't do that. Because I've been programming in JavaScript and Python all week. All right. Get or set accessor. That's what I have here. What did I miss? Get set. Am I missing a, no? Yes. This. Curly braces are your friend. I keep reminding myself. All right. And that probably broke it. So that's there, that's correct. The property should only go around the get and the set. And those have closing. Those have closing. Oh, right. I don't have a closing one for the namespace now. Okay. There we go. All right. So we have a class set up with pretty much the bare minimum needed to demonstrate how to use this. Okay, so pretty much any class you create will have properties and constructor methods. So get used to creating these. So if you need a new value in your object, you just have to add a new property. All right, and I'll show you the shorthand way before we continue, but you do need to understand the shorthand fits on one line, which is nice, instead of having to do this. But if you don't understand the parts of it, it may be difficult to understand why they're there. Okay, so now that we have this class set up, we can create a node object. Okay. So to do that, remember when you declare a new variable in C#, you have to give it a data type so that it locks that variable into only using that data type, which allows it to better keep track of where you're putting what, which lets you keep track of that, and you can avoid very annoying logic errors by putting the wrong thing in the wrong place. It'll basically catch it for you in most cases. So, what type is our new class? Well, hey Scott, do you cap the name of the CS file of new classes? I don't know. Let's look that up. I just want to make sure I'm getting everything. C# class file naming convention. There we go. Use Pascal casing for class names. We did that. And method names. Variables, method parameters. Okay. That's just for you to keep track of.
You never access the file name directly.
Right. Okay. And, you know, they named theirs this way, but I was just making sure that wasn't just replit. Okay. So, it's going to be type of node. It's always the name of the class is the type that we've created. So you can kind of think, you can kind of think of it as creating our own data type, but usually a class is just a bunch of data types stuck together, so you can move them around easily. So, creating a node data type. This is the part that's hardest for me, trying to think of a good variable name, so I won't, and I'll just use this. Alright, so here we're declaring the type. Here we're declaring the identifier or variable name. So this is how we'll reference this object, is this name here. And what we're going to assign into it is a reference to memory where the object will be stored. So to create a new object, use the new keyword that tells the computer, you know, for this object I'm going to need some space in memory to hold all the properties together and methods and things. And now you call the constructor. Okay, so let's go with this. This is the type. This is the identifier. This is a keyword. New is a keyword. And you'll always use that when you instantiate a new object from a class. And then this is a constructor method. And that's pulled from the class. Okay? See if I did the namespace right. Oh, I need to add this into the same namespace. And let's change that namespace because this doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to call this 5th generation is going to be the namespace. Since we're creating an object to represent a 5G node, you can kind of think of it as a smart, powerful router. And they are thinking that at the highest implementation, transfer speeds will be a terabit. And then consumer speeds will be 300 megabits per second, which I get about 50 megabits. Sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 70 at home. So 300, you can do the math there, that's a lot faster. this in a level. There we go. Now that those are in the same namespace, and so now our main file can access any public methods or properties that we add to this class. All right, let's follow through and just see how to use this. So let's print out the property. Inside of node. Well, let's print node first so you can see what that prints out. Whoops. We actually called it apple. So this line is creating an instance of a class. All right. And then here we're going to print out what's stored in this variable. So here it's showing us the namespace and the class that was used to create the object. Which you're probably never going to output that except if you're debugging or comparing spots in memory. Okay, I'm going to keep mentioning this because it's very important to understand. When you create a new object, so when I say create new object, I mean write the code that tells the computer to create a copy of the class as an object. I'm not talking about writing the code to create a new class. Okay, this is why it's important to understand the terminology and ask questions if you're not sure. So let's try checking the ID number on this thing. See if I remember. Oops. Oh. I didn't change the name here. Okay. It's fairly difficult to talk about programming while you're programming, so thank you for bearing with this. I think it's extremely valuable to watch this, especially if I'm going to try to explain my debugging process as I go, though, I'm going to have a lot of syntax errors probably just because I'm switching between languages. If you notice any big mistakes that I make that I didn't notice, definitely post it in the chat. Okay, now it's okay. Get ID number. No, missing an assembly reference. Well, let's check in here. Oops. Oh, right. In C# you don't have to call it by, you can literally just put the name of the property and it will know that you're trying to get that. And if you try to assign a value to it, it'll know to change that property. So if we print this out, we should be able to see 0 here. So take a second. We've done a lot. Where did that 0 come from? If you know, right, Andy's right. It came out of here, but why is it 0? Why would it be 0? It has to do with what we set up in here. See if you guys can see it. All right. So in our constructor method, we just tell the node to set its ID number to 0 for a default. Okay. One thing that is difficult for people to understand is this idea of implicit and explicit. Okay, explicit's really simple because you see every part involved, but implicit is just a shortcut that allows us to write more concise code. And so, for example, this ID number is inside of this class, so it's technically, node.id number, but that would be, annoying to have to type on every single thing. So instead of doing that, because in this situation, this is always going to be in the same place. Instead of a set method, you're always going to be affecting the backing field. So by putting this here, it knows you're implying that it's this field here. All right. It's the only example I can think of what we have right now. So now, and this is using the get method. Okay. And so, I guess I shouldn't put that right in there like that. So let's try out the set method, and then I'll show you. I'm going to try to pull back the curtain, because sometimes looking at this stuff, it just seems like, it's happening by magic, or something you may not understand, but you just take it on faith. If you're taking something on faith, that's okay in this class, but you eventually need to understand how it works to be a better developer. So I'll mention that kind of stuff. So we don't need to write out the property value if we're just setting it. So what we're going to do is we need to access our object that we created here. And we want to change the ID number. And so we can just assign a different value here. And then when we print it out, it should show the change we made. Okay? So we can change the properties of an object by using the set method. So you can do other stuff. Rarely, I don't think in this class we'll need to change these, but we might. You can do other stuff inside the get and set methods, like data validation or whatever else you can think of. So for example, I could do in the set, or even in here, I could, instead of returning ID number, I could return ID number plus 6, okay? Or here, I could add, when I'm setting it, I could add 4 to it or something. I think it'll let me do that. Yes. So now, if we try to change the value to 5, it's going to add 4 to it, so that'll make it 9, and then when we try to print it out, it's going to add 6 to that number, and so it should print out 5 plus 4 plus 6, which is 15. Let's see if I can do math. Yes. Okay. Why would you do that? I just want you to know that you can manipulate these get and set methods. So you could have code in here that's formats the output here maybe, but you want it stored in a different way. For the set, you maybe want to check the values that are going into that property to make sure they're within a certain range. All right. But most of the time, you're just going to have this. All right. So this is the default constructor method, which is you just call the constructor node. In this case, it's called node, with no parameters. Okay. You can overload constructor methods to take different arguments, and that is allowed because C# makes it, when it's checking for the same name being used, for methods it checks the signature, and that signature can be different. You know, it can have the same name, but it can have different arguments, and C# will consider it something different. So we could have another constructor that takes in a number, all right, and then we can use that number to change the value when we call the constructor. Oh. Typo. Okay, so now instead of creating the node here, node object, and then setting its ID to 5, we can just put that value in here in the constructor because we set it up to take one integer value. And we can skip that extra line of code and just have a constructor do that work for us. And you can take in different values. So let's go ahead and give our node a name. Okay, so we're going to need all this stuff, all these parts of a property again, so I'm not going to type all that out. That would be a waste of time. Oops. So we'll just copy it, and then we'll just change the field name. Remember that starts with, that's camel case. The property name is Pascal case, which is all uppercase words. When we're getting the value of the property, we need to get the name. And when we take in a value to set it, it should be stored in the name field. All right, so now we have a name property. So if you don't use a constructor, let's give it a default name. Oops. And if we're giving it an ID only, we can use that value that's given to put in the field. But we're not taking in a name here, so we should use the default. And then we want to create another constructor that can take in an ID and a name. I just realized I did not change the type here. And it's something I keep forgetting to think about, because the other languages I teach are not strictly typed. So that's a term that means the program will not let you use or create a variable unless you tell the computer what type that variable will be, and it locks it into that value. In the future, if you get to systems management, we build a web app using the ASP.NET Core framework. At least that's what I used in the past. By the time I teach that class again next semester, it could be something completely different. But anyway, inside of that framework, there's a because of the way you communicate on the web through HTTP, you have to make some concessions on your typing. So they have a var type that you can use that you don't have to know what the type is ahead of time, but then I think you once you put a value in a var, Scott, can you put anything in there still? Okay. It's not important now. Unless you're so confident in understanding this right now, you need something else to move on to. All right. So we're taking in a string. Let's call it new name. So actually, what people usually do when they are naming these parameters, just to save time, they use the same name here. Let me make sure that works though. And then you can do this. That's called ID number. Well, that one won't work because they have different names, but I think you can do this. Okay. So now let's create an object using our new constructor. So we'll just comment this one out. Create a new one. And so I'll put this back together so it doesn't look so weird. And we'll keep the ID at 5, but let's give it a name of Sarah. And we'll have to, now I'll just put it on a separate one for now so you guys can see that. We're only printing the ID number right now, but let's go ahead and print the name too. Maybe we'll do the name first. Our node's going to have a name? I don't know. The idea will be that once you're connected to a 5G network, if you're in range of any node, you'll be able to access the internet. And if you move away from that node, it'll know and tell the next node you're moving towards to take over for you. And you won't even know it's happening. Can you imagine traveling anywhere, not having to ask for Wi-Fi passwords and SSIDs? should have cleared the console first. Okay. Hopefully this is just Replit messing up. Let's try putting this back and see if that was the problem. If you ever encounter this issue when you're working with Replit, a good way to fix it is to refresh the page. And on it, and you're going to want to copy your code before you do that, because if it lost its connection before I wrote the newer code, it's not going to have that saved. So it's a good idea. Go ahead and grab your code. Okay, it doesn't like the file because the computer's nervous whenever you're grabbing compiled code, and so this has an exe file in it, so it's panicking, because one way that people get screwed over by people stealing money from them is they will go to a website through an email and download an exe, run it, and then that gives access, to your computer, from your computer to a scammer. So do not download exes. It's okay here because, I know I made this, so it's, unless I accidentally coded to wipe my system, I don't even think it can do that. That's your next project. Write a C# program that'll just nuke your computer.
Is this a 2-hour class?
I gotta cover all of chapter, no, I gotta cover half of chapter 9, but I want to finish this idea. Okay. Sometimes it just takes a long time to... Oh, okay. No, I think it was working. I think it... Well, let's change it back to this and see if it breaks. Okay, we're trying to print... Whoa, okay, it just reverted back. I watched that happen. Okay. Yeah, I think it is confused here. I should have just stuck with what I knew would work, because using different names... New name. Forgot an A. Alright, so now we can print the node's name, or ID number and name, because we have access to those. Alright. Okay, so this next part here shows basically another example of the code we made. So they created a class called employee, and then they're creating a new object from that class, and they're going to store the reference to that in this variable, myChef. And they're using the employee constructor to create the object that will be stored in memory. And then the reference to that spot in memory will be stored in this variable. All right. and then they're setting the ID number, and then here they're using, I believe this is called string interpolation, which is one way you can build a string that's different than string concatenation, and it's a lot easier to read than putting a bunch of double quotes and plus signs in your printout statements. So I can just show you that real quick. The way that works is, I want to do this on one line, so what I can do just throw these throw this in here, and then I can just build the string here, and I can do, maybe I want to see the name first, so I would put 2 here, or not 2, 1, because remember, numbering starts at 0. So if I want the second value after the string to be put into the string, I have to use its index number, which would be 1, because it's the second one. Okay. Did that sound as confusing as it did in my head? And then we'll use the escape character for a new line, and we can put in here name and ID, and how, okay, if it's showing me there's 4 people, which I think 2 of them might be me, so there's maybe 2 people still watching. How do you think I get the ID number here? So remember, I used this to put the name in. What would I put here, do you think, to get that number? What do you think? So if name is the second index, or index 1, then this one's the first index. That needs to be 0. Okay, now let's see if I did it right. There. And so, as you can see, this is a much easier way to build more complicated strings once you know the syntax. Oh, I saw Andy got it. All right, I think people are going to definitely want to watch this on 2 times speed. I'll show you this last thing, which is the shorthand for setting up a property. So let's add a new property using this shorthand so you can see the difference. And so we were going to add bandwidth earlier. So here we have one property, and I think it'll let us minimize that. And then here's our other property, so let's minimize that so I don't confuse myself. And let's add the new property above the others. So we just have to give it public access. We give it a name, and then we just have to put some curly braces and then get set. Get semicolon, set semicolon. And so this right here on line 12 encompasses all of this. So you can see why this is kind of preferred for creating properties. But if I just showed you this, would you understand that there's a field inside of there? or that these are methods that you can change. I don't know. I found out that kind of information way too late. Okay. When I was learning this. And so now that we have that, on line 12 of node. Oh, I forgot to give it a type. I always do that. So we'll give this int. There we go. Okay. And so now, if we want to set that value, so we're creating this node, it's called Apple. And when I put Apple in here, I mean the fruit, not the company. I have nothing against the company, but I just want you to know I'm not like being sponsored by Apple or anything. I'm only sponsored by Lakeland College in Mattoon, Illinois. Check out our online programs. Nobody is gonna get this far in the video that's not already a Lakeland. Okay. So we can change the bandwidth value using the set method that we set up by just adding the word set here. Okay, and let's set it to 300. So we'll consider this in megabits per second, because someday we'll have that in a perfect world. And we can add that here under the ID number. So we just put this in here. We just change this string to add it in. So we'll put mbps for megabits per second. And we have to include it in our arguments so that it can access it in the string. And hope that Replit does not disconnect again while I'm running it, which it looks like it is. Okay. Console line 15. So I see the error, but it says the error is on line 15. This is a debugging tip. And some of you probably already figured this out by now, hopefully. If you made it to this class, you've been doing a lot of debugging prior to this lesson. So if you can't find the error on the line, okay, and it says it's character 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whoops, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's no error here. So where should I look next? Just start working your way backwards. It's usually right before it. And so if I just work my way backwards, I see I forgot a semicolon. So that's a very, once you get that as kind of a muscle memory debugging technique, it helps a lot. Hopefully at some point you stop making syntax errors, but I still do. But I don't do this once you do this every day, it'll be much simpler. So there's that. So you got to see the string interpolation, which you don't need objects to use this. You can use this anytime you need to build a string with variable values. I showed you how to create a new class in a separate file. Okay, and why would we do that? Why would we create the class in a separate file? Think about it. While I get a drink of water. Think about why we I made a big deal about it in the beginning. I think in the previous example, I just created the class inside the same file. But why would I create it in a separate file? There's a very good reason. And that reason is you can copy this file independently from the other classes and put it in another project. Okay, so I've created a class that lets me keep track of nodes. I could apply that in, different types of programs, and I don't have to rewrite that every single time. So I can show you that real quick, and then I think we'll be done. So I'm just gonna download the file. And I'm actually going to, if you're going to download the file, you don't need the exe when you're downloading, and it will make Windows a lot happier if you get rid of it before you download. Let's see if it doesn't like the CS files either. Okay, it's not scared of that. Okay, so it puts it in a zip file. I'll extract that into the folder. And then, whoop. We can go into that folder. Where did I put it? Documents? Yeah. So here are the files. And I have the two files for my replit, but I have node CSS here. So if I want to create a new project that uses that, all right, and to make this to demonstrate this even more, let's put it in a project I've already created. Whoops. That's not what I wanted. I don't even know what C# things I might have in here. Oh, not that one. That's something we'll talk about, interfaces. Let's see what this is. This might work, it might not work. Okay, that must have been a work in progress. I was trying to build a simulation of different bugs interacting in an environment, and I don't think I finished that example. I'd love to go back and revisit that. So I guess I did get it to work, partially. But what I did was I had each student build their own bug and give it its own behaviors. And so this C bug here, you'll notice it keeps walking in one direction, and then once it hits the wall, it turns around and continues going this way. And let's see if I can zoom in on this more. Here we go. This R bug looks like it goes to the edge, and then it wraps around and goes up. So that one has teleportation abilities. The C moves, I think. Oh, we already talked about the C. The K moves like a knight in chess, so in an L shape. And then the X, I think the X just teleports around randomly. But we were going to expand on this and add food that the bugs have to compete over getting and things like that. It's kind of a precursor to implementing some AI with machine learning on some kind of a simple simulation. Anyway, I can add the code from my node in here by uploading a file. So here's what would happen in real life. I need a node. I need to keep track of nodes in my program. Well, I created a node class in a previous program. I think that would be perfect. That'll save me, you know, an hour of work trying to rewrite that. So I go find it, and I can upload that, and the namespace of this project is bug crawl. And remember, we gave the node a namespace of 5th generation. So I think we just have to do, and namespaces should be Pascal case. So that was my bad. That's just a standard, right? It was working, but it's just a standard. And so if I try to create a node object, equals new node, we'll just use the default values. We'll see what it says. And it says it cannot find where node is, but it is saying this hint right here is exactly what I need. It says, are you missing the 5th generation using directive? And what that means is you just have to come up here and say, well, I want to using 5th generation. And that should give us access to that class. And so the object was able to be created, and it looks like we print out stuff in render. And printing out a bunch of junk in here. Right after we clear it, let's go ahead and put in console dot write line, and we'll print out node dot name, and then we should be able to see that now if we remember our semicolon. And whoops, I called it apple, didn't I? Okay. And because this is inside of another method, we'll have to pass in the value unless, see if this works. Okay, I tried to cheat it. So we'll have to pass in a node to this method to be able to access it. So I'll make a spot for node. I'll just call it apple again, so I don't have to change this. And now we have to upload the rendering class, which I think, did we put that in here? No, it's a static. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay. When I call render, I have to pass in the object. Hey, Scott, when you're creating a variable for an object, do you capitalize it, that variable?
Depends where it is.
Okay. If I'm just instantiating a new object from a class in main?
No.
Okay. Because that's a local variable to main, right? Okay. Okay, that should work. All that to show you, I wanted to get the name. I took that node class I made in another program, and I was able to reuse it. You saw how easy it was to just hook it in, copy it in, use the namespace, and now I can access all of the members of that class. So that demonstrated the modular nature of object-oriented programming. That'll be the last thing we talk about today. I pushed that due date back because only 2 people had turned in the homework, so make sure if you're stuck, talk to me. And don't, I guess it was due tonight, so hopefully everyone tries it. But I gave you an extra week, but don't put it off. Okay, have a good day, and I'll see you next Thursday.